And good morning. I'm Robert George. Welcome to another edition of Bloomberg Opinion Conversations. Today, I'm back with my colleague, Mary Duenwald. And this is a great moment, Mary, because we're actually in the studio. Here we are, face to face. And dare I say it, in the very well ventilated Bloomberg HQ, which I think is perfectly appropriate because your editorial this week focuses on what we've learned during the pandemic about ventilation, air conditioning, and so forth. So let's as the Holly said, let's talk about the air that we breathe.
Well, it's come up as an issue because, you know, normally we're used to just caring whether we're hot or cold or comfortable in a room. What we learned from the pandemic is that viruses hang in the air of poorly ventilated rooms, and it's an easy way for people to catch the virus. The virus particles hang in the air suspended for quite a while, and so somebody can breathe them out. The next person can come along and breathe them in. And so, on top of the temperature of the air and um, just the comfort level, now it's obvious that we have to also care about ventilation and how quickly air circulation systems can move virus particles out of the room.
So one of the, I guess, new technologies that we've kind of learned now is displacement ventilation. What is that, and how does it differ from the ventilation that we've come to know, over the previous decades?
Ordinarily, in an ordinary building, you get something called mixing ventilation. So air comes down through vents in the ceiling, mixes with the air in the room, and then it circulates back up through other vents in the ceiling. This is a kind of a slow process, and it's adequate to maintain the right temperature and to keep the room from feeling too stuffy, but it doesn't allow for moving that virus particles out of the air. Displacement ventilation has been around a while, and it's used in like surgical suites and in more buildings in Europe than in the United States. Um, it's just superior for moving virus particles out. The air comes in through vents low in the room and is pulled out through vents up in the ceiling. So you get a vertical movement of air from the ground toward the ceiling, and that pulls the particles up and away rather than spinning them around the
So
room.
in a, am I saying this right? Instead of just the idea of kind of just circulating bad air, for want of a better phrase, we're actually that's getting pushed out, and we're getting more literally fresher air, which is most likely less infected, or is not infected at all.
Yes, I mean, it's like a chimney effect. The air is coming from the ground and moving up. The air that's coming into a room differs depending on a particular building's ventilation system. Not a lot of Some buildings have fresh air coming into that mix, which is ideal. Some buildings don't have a lot of fresh air, but they have filtered air. So filters, especially HEPA filters, do filter out virus particles along with dust and allergens and other kinds of stuff that buildings are trying to get out of the air.
HEPA filters, exactly what are those?
HEPA filters it's a classification of filters that does a good job of getting rid of filtering out allergens, and they also filter out virus particles.
Now, the displacement ventilation, that's basically what the airlines have been using to sort of promote the fact that they've got clean air, in terms of encouraging people to be comfortable in. Or is it a variation of that?
I don't know if they would call that. I don't know what they would call that actually, but the airlines do have HEPA filters generally, and also a lot of mixing of fresh air in with the air. They circulate their air in the cabins very frequently. And that's why there hasn't been a lot of spread of the coronavirus in airplanes.
Now, a big question in this issue of ventilation and so forth is what's going on in the schools, and we're middle of July. People are thinking about what's going to be happening. What's going to be happening in September. Based on your reporting, it seems that the schools are putting a lot of money into getting heavily ventilated when it seems that they could be doing things a lot cheaper, that they're just opening up windows more and literally letting fresh air in. Is that fairly accurate?
I mean, schools tend to be poorly ventilated. There are various surveys that suggest that most schools are poorly ventilated, but it doesn't always help to open a window. But some of the pandemic relief money from Congress was given to schools to encourage them to improve ventilation in the buildings. And unfortunately, some of this money was spent on things like ionizers and other unproven air purifiers. What you really need is ventilation, which is this flow of air that moves the virus particles out of the room. So that's going to take more study and care on the part of the schools. The U.S. Department of Education is writing some new guidelines for schoolroom air. In the case of schoolrooms, it's also, and ventilation is also important just to keep carbon dioxide levels down. When you get into a room full of people, how you have that sense that the air has gotten stuffy. That's the carbon dioxide in the air that we exhale. If it's usually at a certain level in the room, and the density of carbon dioxide increases in it reaches a certain level, people start to get headaches and feel tired and nauseous, and studies have suggested it makes it very hard to concentrate and learn.
So I mean, there's literally educational benefit from being purely ventilated and clearly ventilated.
Yep.
Now, are there implications for this in homes as well? I mean, in terms of obviously, we're in New York City. We've got all these very large residential buildings as well, and is there a transition? Do older buildings need to get new systems in, and are newer buildings are they going to be getting in some of these newer technology ventilation systems?
I mean, this is going to be a challenge for buildings of all kinds. It's hard to, take an existing building and add a displacement ventilation system, but you can do a lot of other things, like add fans and more portable air filters, both of which work. There are ways of killing virus particles with UV radiation that can be used. Usually it's up higher in the room. There are strategies to improve the air quality and air circulation in buildings. In people's houses, the classic strategy is to have cross ventilation. So you open a window on one side of the room, but you also open one on the other side of the room, so that there's a flow. The idea is to get the air flowing and keep it clean.
Exactly. Are there regulatory implications that we need to look at as we're going into the brave new world of ventilation?
The priority has been in recent years on energy efficiency, and with reason. So building codes are written more with energy efficiency in mind, and they don't really take into account the need to clean out virus particles or pathogens, aerosols, they're called. I'm sure you've heard. They're going to need to be reconsidered with that in mind. It takes a little more energy to add the filtration and to do the things that make the air cleaner, but it's energy that will be needed to be spent.
Well, I mean, I think I think you may have made a reference that it, some of these aerosols obviously have impact on ozone and so forth. So, uh, is there a possibility that, you know, as we try and, you know, get better, we get better ventilated, that there's an actual, there is an impact on ozone levels, and is there going to be a is there going to be a tension between, you know, moving in a greener direction, versus being a more purified air
I mean,
atmosphere?
these are the things that engineers will need to work on. I mean, it's possible to keep air clean without, you know, making it an environmental harm. The ionizers that I mentioned earlier that some of the schools have bought, some of them release ozone, which is, you know, that's a danger for people with asthma. It's not an ideal thing to have in a classroom.
So, is the takeaway that we should be more you know, self-assured in terms of in terms of ventilation, in terms of terms of air, or, you know, are there any kind of downsides that we need to be cautious of?
I mean, I think it would be nice for all of us who live and work in buildings to know exactly how well ventilated they are. You know, some people have thought it might be a good idea for cities to issue ventilation certificates, or somehow persuade building owners and operators to be transparent with people about what is, how well ventilated is the building that they're in, so that they know at times of, you know, flu season, when infectious diseases are about, that you start following the other things that we've learned during the pandemic, like social distancing and mask wearing and that kind of thing.
Um, well, I mean, that's great, and that seems, I think that's probably a good place to a good place to stop. Mary, thank you so much. This has been eye-opening, and it's good to be back. It's good to be back in the studio. I'm Robert George. We'll be doing this again next week.